Hi everyone. I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but I need to get it off my chest. My parents kicked me out a year ago, right before my high school finals, because my older half-sister got pregnant and wanted to move back home. I had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. I was terrified. Now, out of nowhere, my mom is reaching out. She says she misses me, that she wants to fix things. But I know her. I know how she works. And something tells me there's more to the story. I was never really part of my family, not in the way that mattered. My mom had my sister, Lauren, when she was young, just a college fling with Jack, my stepfather. They never married at the time, but Jack wanted to be in Lauren's life, and my mom let him. Then she met my dad, got married, had me. But that marriage didn't last. The way my mom always told it, my dad wasn't ready for a kid and walked out before I was born. She made it sound like he was some selfish, reckless guy who ran at the first sign of responsibility. I never questioned it. What else was I supposed to believe? Jack came back into the picture when I was a baby, and this time, my mom actually married him. I guess he had always loved her, at least, that's what she convinced herself. But me? I wasn't his. And he never let me forget it. From the time I was little, I could feel the distance. It was in the way he looked past me instead of at me. The way he barely acknowledged me unless he had to. I remember once, when I was maybe 5, I tried holding his hand in a parking lot because I was scared of the cars. He pulled away like I had burned him. "You're not a baby," he muttered, walking ahead. Lauren wasn't much better. She had Jack wrapped around her finger and knew it. She got everything she wanted, the best clothes, the latest phone, expensive summer camps. I got whatever was left over. It wasn't outright cruelty. It was worse. It was like I didn't exist unless I was in the way. I spent years trying to change that, trying to be a part of their family. But at some point, I stopped. I guess you can only knock on a locked door so many times before you get the message. Still, I never expected them to actually throw me out. It was a week before finals. I was exhausted, barely sleeping, running on stress and caffeine. Lauren showed up at the house late one night, sat me down, and announced she was pregnant. I remember nodding, still half asleep, waiting for her to get to the point. Then my mom spoke. "Honey, we need your room." I blinked, thinking I misheard. Lauren had a room. But after she moved out for college, Jack converted it into his office. Apparently, they didn't want to move his things, and Lauren needed privacy. So the only solution? Kick me out. Think of it as a sacrifice for family, my mom said gently, like she was asking me to donate a kidney. I laughed. I actually laughed. "You're joking, right?" They weren't. I told them no. I wasn't leaving. Lauren wasn't a child. She could stay in her own apartment or sleep on the damn couch. But my refusal wasn't part of their plan. Jack got that look in his eyes, the one that had always made me feel like I was an inconvenience. "You're an adult now," he said. "And this is my house. If you don't like it, leave." I turned to my mom, waiting for her to say something, to defend me. But she just sighed. "We don't have time to argue about this, sweetheart. We need to focus on our real grandkids now." That word. Real. I had spent my whole life feeling like an outsider, but in that moment, I knew for sure I wasn't part of their family. Not really. So I packed my things. They didn't try to stop me. I ended up at my best friend Emily's house. When I told her and her parents everything, they didn't even hesitate before telling me I could stay as long as I needed. I don't think I've ever cried harder in my life. Not just because I was scared, but because for the first time, I felt like someone actually wanted me. I kept waiting for my mom to call. A day passed, then a week, then a month. She never did. At some point, I stopped waiting. I graduated. Got a scholarship, not my first choice, but enough to get me out. Emily's parents co-signed a student loan for me. I didn't want to ask them for more, not after everything they had already done. I struggled, but I made it work. And I was proud of that. Then, last week, out of nowhere, my mom emailed me. "Hey, sweetheart. We miss you. Jack and Lauren miss you too. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner this weekend? We want to make things right." I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it. That small, stupid part of me that still craved my mother's love. But something felt off. A year of silence, and suddenly she wanted to fix things? It was too convenient. And I learned the hard way that when my mom wanted something, there was always a catch. I didn't respond. 3 days later, another email came. Longer. More emotional. "I know we made mistakes. But family is family, and we should try to heal. Please, just come home for one night. Let's talk." I almost caved. Almost. Then, the real twist came. My maternal grandparents, who I had never met, who I didn't even know were alive, suddenly contacted me. I was sitting in my dorm when my phone rang, and I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to pick up. "Is this Sarah?" An older woman's voice asked, shaky but kind. I hesitated. "Yes. Who is this?" There was a pause. Then, softly, "I'm your grandmother, sweetheart. And we need to talk." My blood ran cold. That was the moment everything changed. I barely remember the rest of that phone call. My grandmother, my actual, living grandmother, kept talking, but I felt like I was underwater, my thoughts muffled by shock. She wanted to meet. Said there were things I needed to know. That she and my grandfather had been trying to find me for a long time. I agreed. I don't even know why. Maybe because I had spent my whole life thinking I had no family outside of my mother. Maybe because part of me needed to know if she was telling the truth. Or maybe I just wanted to hear someone call me sweetheart and actually mean it. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a quiet little cafe, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The door opened, and I saw them. An older couple, my grandmother, petite with silver hair, her eyes scanning the room anxiously. My grandfather, tall and serious-looking, but with kind eyes. They spotted me, and my grandmother's face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart." She rushed toward me, stopping just short of pulling me into a hug, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. I didn't move. I didn't know how to move. "You look just like your father," she whispered. A sharp, unexpected pang hit me. No one had ever said that to me before. My mother barely talked about him at all. I swallowed, my throat tight. "You knew my dad." My grandmother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, honey, he loved you so much." Something in my chest cracked open. We sat down, and for the next hour, they told me everything. How my mother had lied about her past. How she was never actually disowned for having Lauren. How my grandparents had tried to support her until she chose Jack over them. Jack had problems, my grandfather said, shaking his head. Drugs, bad decisions. We didn't want him around Lauren, and we told your mother we'd help her, but only if she stayed away from him. I sat there, stunned, as they explained how my mother had cut them out, not the other way around. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. "Sarah," my grandmother said hesitantly, "your mother told you your father left before you were born, right?" I nodded slowly. She exchanged a look with my grandfather before turning back to me. "That's not what happened." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Your father wanted you. He fought for you. He even had partial custody for a while. But then, when you were 7 months old, he died in a car accident." I couldn't breathe. "He was driving to pick you up," my grandfather continued, his voice tight with anger. "Your mother let him have you for weekends back then. But he never made it." My hands were shaking. "He never left you, sweetheart," my grandmother said softly. "Your mother just made sure you never knew the truth." A rush of emotions hit me all at once. Grief for a man I never got to know, fury at my mother for stealing him from me, and something else. Relief. For my entire life, I thought my father hadn't wanted me, that I was some mistake he ran away from. But that was never true. I had been wanted. I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself. Why would she do that? My grandfather exhaled sharply. "Because she wanted Jack. And she knew if she let your father's family stay in your life, they'd fight for you. She didn't want that." I felt sick. I had spent years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, that I was no one's priority. And now I knew I had been. Once. And my mother had stolen that from me. I barely heard the rest. How my grandparents had tried to reach out for years. How my mother refused every attempt. How, eventually, they stopped trying until they found out what she had done to me. And then, the final blow. "We own the house your parents live in," my grandfather said quietly. "We bought it for your mother years ago, hoping she'd let us back in her life. But after we found out what happened to you, we're taking it back." I stared at them. "We want you to decide what happens next," my grandmother said gently. "If you want, they're out. The house will be yours. It's your choice, sweetheart. And we'll support you no matter what." My heart pounded. For the first time in my life, I had power. I barely remember leaving the cafe. My grandparents hugged me before we parted ways, but my mind was somewhere else. My feet carried me back to my dorm, but I wasn't really there. I was still sitting in that booth, hearing the words over and over again. "Your father loved you. Your mother lied. We want you to decide what happens next." I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning everything over in my head, trying to process it. My mother had spent my entire life making sure I believed I was unwanted, disposable. And all this time, it was her who had thrown people away. And now I had the power to do the same to her. The idea of it made my heart race. Not out of fear. Not out of guilt. Out of something dangerously close to satisfaction. I ignored my mother's emails for a few days. Each one was more desperate than the last. At first, she played the loving mother act. Sweetheart, we just want to see you. We miss you so much. Then came the guilt tripping. I don't understand why you're ignoring me. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. And finally, the anger. Stop acting like a child. Family is family. It's time to come home and stop all this nonsense. That last one almost made me laugh. Now she wanted me home? After throwing me away like I was nothing? After a year of silence? I deleted every message without responding. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from Emily. Hey, she said cautiously. Your mom showed up at my house. I nearly dropped my phone. She what? Yeah. She knocked on the door and started asking my mom where you were. Said she was worried about you, that you'd been ignoring her, and she just wanted to talk. I gritted my teeth. And my mom told her to leave. And, she did not take it well. Emily sighed. She started getting pissed, saying you were being ungrateful, that you were choosing strangers over your real family. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. That's rich. Yeah, we thought so too. There was a pause, then Emily lowered her voice. Sarah, she's scared. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like she knows something's about to happen. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. She did know. My grandparents had already started the eviction process. She was running out of time, and she knew it. That night, I made my decision. I called my grandparents. Do it, I said. Kick them out. There was silence on the other end. Then my grandmother exhaled, relief evident in her voice. Are you sure, sweetheart? She asked gently. You don't have to. I'm sure, I cut in. They made their choice when they threw me away. I'm just returning the favor. 2 weeks later, the eviction notice was served. I wasn't there to see it, but my grandparents told me everything. Jack was furious, threatening legal action, but he had no case. The house was never his. My mother tried to cry, to play the victim, but my grandparents didn't budge. They gave them 30 days to leave. Lauren, surprisingly, didn't fight it. She just stood there, holding her baby, looking tired. I should have felt something about that. Maybe pity, maybe regret. But I didn't. I didn't hear from my mother for a while after that. No emails. No calls. Silence. Then, a week before they were set to move out, she sent me one last email. It was long, rambling, full of bitterness. But one line stood out. I wish I never had you. I wish you had been in that car with your father, so I never had to deal with you. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. Not with sadness. Not even with anger. Just finality. I had spent my whole life craving this woman's love, bending over backward to prove I was worth it. And this was how she really felt. I closed the email. Then I deleted it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I just felt free. The day my mother and Jack were officially evicted, I didn't feel anything. No rush of satisfaction, no guilt, just a strange, quiet sense of finality. Like something had been severed, permanently. My grandparents moved into the house right away. They invited me to visit, told me it was mine as much as it was theirs now, but I hesitated. It was still that house. The one I had been thrown out of. The one I had spent years feeling like a stranger in. But a week later, I got a text from my grandmother. Sweetheart, whenever you're ready, come home. Home. That word sat heavy in my chest. I didn't respond right away. But later that night, when I was sitting in my tiny dorm room, staring at the bare walls, I thought about it again. About the way my grandparents had fought for me when no one else ever had. About how, for the first time in my life, I had people who wanted me around. So the next morning, I got on a bus and went back. I stood in the driveway for a long time before going inside. The house looked the same from the outside, but the second I stepped through the door, I felt it. Everything had changed. It was brighter, warmer. The air didn't feel suffocating anymore. My grandparents had repainted, rearranged furniture, erased every trace of my mother and Jack. But my old bedroom? It was still mine. I ran my fingers over my old bookshelf, half expecting to hear my mother's voice snapping at me to clean up. But she wasn't here. She would never be here again. This was my space now. How does it feel? My grandmother asked softly from the doorway. I swallowed hard. Weird. But good. She smiled, stepping inside. I didn't change much. I wanted you to decide what felt right. I nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, familiar but different. I was home. And for the first time, that word actually meant something. But just as I was starting to settle into this new version of my life, something unexpected happened. Lauren reached out to me. It was just a short message, 2 sentences. I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk? Please. I stared at the text, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Lauren had never been as cruel as Jack, but she had never been kind either. She had spent years pretending I didn't exist, treating me like I was nothing. Now, suddenly, she wanted to talk? Why? I typed back. Her response came instantly. Because I think I finally understand what you went through. And I'm sorry. I sat there, rereading those words, my heart pounding. Lauren. Apologizing. I agreed to meet her. Not because I trusted her. Not because I believed she had really changed. But because part of me wanted to see if she had. We met at a quiet diner outside of town. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked different. Tired. Worn down in a way that had nothing to do with sleepless nights and everything to do with life. For a while, we just sat in silence. Then, finally, she spoke. I didn't get it before, she admitted, running her fingers along the rim of her cup. I thought you were just being dramatic when you said Mom and Jack didn't care about you. I thought, I don't know, that you were overreacting. I didn't say anything. She took a deep breath. But when they lost the house, Sarah, they didn't even try to fight for me. Or for my son. They just left. I frowned. What do you mean? Lauren let out a hollow laugh. I thought maybe Mom would finally pick me. That she'd realize Jack had always been the problem, that she'd choose her daughter and grandchild over him. But she didn't. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Understanding. She and Jack moved to some tiny apartment across town, she continued. And when I asked if I could come too, she said she couldn't afford to take care of me and the baby. She told me I needed to figure it out on my own. Something inside me twisted. So now you know how it feels, I said quietly. She nodded. Yeah, now I do. I didn't know what to do with that. For years, I had fantasized about this moment, about Lauren realizing how much pain she had caused, about her finally seeing me. And now that it was happening, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired. Lauren cleared her throat. I know I can't fix the past, but I want to try. If you ever want to talk. I'd like that. I stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was a start. Lauren and I didn't suddenly become close after that conversation. There were too many years of silence, too many things left unsaid. But something shifted that day. She stopped being just a face from my past. For the first time, she felt like a person. We didn't talk every day, but she kept reaching out, sending pictures of her son, telling me little stories about his first steps, his first words. And slowly, against every instinct I had, I found myself responding. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't want to be like them. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. I spent more weekends at my grandparents' house, getting used to the idea that it was mine now, too. Some days, it still felt surreal, walking through those halls without the weight of Jack's presence, without my mother's cold, indifferent silence pressing down on me. But it felt better. One evening, my grandfather and I sat on the back porch, watching the sky fade into deep shades of orange and pink. He sipped his tea, quiet for a long time, before finally speaking. You know, Sarah, when we found out what your mother did to you, we felt so much guilt. He sighed, running a hand over his face. We should have fought harder. We should have done more. I looked over at him, surprised. It wasn't your fault. She made sure I never even knew about you. He exhaled, shaking his head. Maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that we lost so many years. He turned to me, his expression softening. And that's something we'll always regret. I hesitated, then reached over, squeezing his hand. We have time now, I said. That's what matters. He smiled, squeezing back. For the first time in my life, I had real family. People who actually wanted me. And I wasn't going to waste another second of it. But just when I thought everything was settling down, my mother came back one last time. It happened a few months later. I had just gotten back from class when I saw the email sitting in my inbox. I almost deleted it without reading. But something made me stop. It was short. Just one sentence. I hope you're happy now. I stared at the words, waiting for something to hit me. Anger. Sadness. regret. But there was nothing. Just silence. Because for the first time in my life, I was happy. And I didn't need her anymore. I shut my laptop and walked away.